Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
A few years ago, I bought my first house. It was a big step for me and my husband, and we were excited about the future. At the same time, my parents were struggling financially. They'd made some poor decisions and were having trouble making ends meet. Being the dutiful daughter I am, I offered to let them rent my house at a significantly reduced rate. I mean, they're my parents, right? I wanted to help them out. We drew up a lease agreement and I made sure to include all the necessary legal details. I even had a lawyer look it over to make sure everything was in order. My parents moved in, and for a while things were great. They had a comfortable place to live, and I felt good about helping them out. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. I realized that with rising costs, I needed to increase the rent slightly. We're talking about a $3 increase. $3. I thought it would be no big deal. When I broached the subject with my parents, you'd think I'd told them I was kicking them out onto the street. My mom started crying, and my dad, well, he lost it. He yelled about how outrageous this was, asking if this was how I repaid them after everything they'd done for me. I tried to explain that it was just $3 and that the cost of maintaining the house had gone up, but he wouldn't listen. Dad kept going on about all the work they'd put into the place, mentioning the garage screen door, the shed roof, and even a leaky hose they'd fixed. I pointed out that those things were their choice and that the lease clearly stated their responsibilities. Mom chimed in, saying they never would have done any of that if they knew they were just renters. I had to remind them that yes, they were indeed renters, as stated in the lease. Dad then claimed they didn't realize all the stuff I'd put in the lease. I had to tell them it was their responsibility to read what they were signing. The argument went on and on. They accused me of trying to throw them out, of not appreciating all they'd done for me. It got so heated that I eventually had to walk away. I was hurt, angry, and confused. How could my own parents act this way? For a week, we didn't speak. I was hoping they'd cool down and see reason. But when I tried to talk to my dad again, he doubled down on his ridiculous claims. He insisted the house was uninhabitable when they moved in, which wasn't true at all. He kept going on about how much they'd done for me and how I was treating them poorly in return. I lost my cool at that point. I said some things I'm not proud of, including suggesting that maybe the alcohol was affecting his memory. I told them they weren't welcome around me or my son until they came to their senses. After that blow-up, my mom called, trying to smooth things over. She asked what they could do to resolve this, saying that not being able to see their grandson was upsetting. I told her they needed to apologize for what they called me and admit they were out of line. That's when the truth came out. My parents, it turns out, had fallen for a scam. They'd been getting calls and visits from people claiming to represent me, saying they were going to be renting the house. When I mentioned the rent increase, they thought it was connected to these scammers. Mom confessed that they were scared and thought they had nowhere to go. When I asked why they didn't just ask me about it, Dad admitted they were embarrassed and thought they were smarter than that. I had to remind them that I would never throw them out on the street and that it wasn't even legal to do so. My parents apologized profusely, saying they were sorry and that they shouldn't have believed those people. Dad asked if I could forgive them. I took a deep breath. It had been a rough few weeks, but they were still my parents. They'd made a mistake, a pretty big one, but they were owning up to it now. I told them, of course, I forgave them, but we needed to talk about trust and communication. We spent the next hour going over the lease agreement, explaining why certain clauses were there, and discussing how we could prevent misunderstandings in the future. I also advised them to file a police report about the scammers and to call the cops if anyone suspicious showed up again. Eventually, we reached an understanding. They agreed to the $3 rent increase, and I agreed to keep a closer eye on them to make sure they didn't fall for any more scams. All this drama, all this pain, over $3 and a misunderstanding. It just goes to show that even the people closest to us can sometimes act entitled and irrational. A few months ago, my husband left us, just packed up and disappeared one day, leaving nothing but a note saying he needed to find himself. Yeah, right. More like he needed to find the younger woman he'd been seeing behind my back. Suddenly, I was alone with our 5-year-old daughter, struggling to make ends meet. I picked up extra shifts at the diner where I work, but it barely covered the bills. My little girl was a trooper through it all, always trying to cheer me up with her goofy jokes and warm hugs. After weeks of non-stop work and stress, I decided we both needed a break. The weather was perfect, so I took a rare day off to take her to the park. I wanted to see her smile, to hear her laugh without a care in the world, even if just for a few hours. We were having a blast. My daughter was running around the playground making new friends, and I was soaking in the sun, feeling relaxed for the first time in ages. That's when it happened. I heard a commotion near the slide and looked up to see a woman, probably in her 40s, grabbing my daughter's hair. My little girl was crying, trying to pull away, but this woman had a death grip on her long blonde locks. I shouted at the woman, demanding to know what she was doing and telling her to let go of my daughter. I jumped up and ran over, my heart pounding in my chest. The woman yelled back, accusing my daughter of pushing her son off the slide and insisting she needed to learn manners. I told her I didn't care what happened and that she had no right to put her hands on my child. I demanded again that she let go. The woman refused, saying she wouldn't until my daughter apologized. My little girl, crying, apologized and begged to be released, saying it hurt. I could see the fear in my baby's eyes and something inside me snapped. All the stress, anger, and frustration I'd been holding back for months came flooding out. I repeated my demand for her to let go, my voice low and dangerous. The woman challenged me to make her. That was it. I didn't even think. I just acted. I grabbed the woman's wrist and twisted it hard, forcing her to release my daughter's hair. As soon as my little girl was free, I pushed her behind me. The woman threatened to sue me for assault. She raised her hand, clearly intending to slap me. But I was quicker. I ducked under her swing and tackled her, using all my weight to slam her to the ground. We hit the rubber playground surface hard, and I heard a sickening pop followed by a scream. The woman cried out, accusing me of dislocating her shoulder and calling me a psycho. I scrambled to my feet, breathing hard. The woman was writhing on the ground, clutching her shoulder and wailing. A crowd had gathered and I could hear people murmuring. A bystander spoke up, saying they saw the whole thing and that the woman had attacked my daughter first. Another bystander agreed, saying I was just defending my kid. I turned to my daughter, who was crying quietly behind me. I scooped her up in my arms, holding her close. I comforted her, telling her she was safe now and that I had her. My daughter apologized, saying she didn't mean to push anyone. I reassured her it wasn't her fault and that the woman had no right to hurt her. I looked down at the woman, who was still moaning dramatically on the ground. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt, but a larger part felt satisfied. For once, I hadn't backed down. I'd stood up for myself and my daughter. The woman threatened to call the police, saying I would rot in jail. I calmly told her to go ahead, pointing out that there were plenty of witnesses who saw her assault a child. I suggested the police would be very interested in hearing about that. The woman's face paled. She seemed to realize for the first time that she wasn't going to come out on top in this situation. Just then, a man in workout clothes jogged up. He looked at the scene with concern and introduced himself as an off-duty paramedic, asking if everyone was okay. The woman immediately complained that I had attacked her and dislocated her shoulder. The paramedic knelt beside her, examining her shoulder carefully. He confirmed it was dislocated and said he could pop it back in, but advised she'd need to go to the hospital for x-rays. He looked up at me, his expression questioning. I explained that the woman had grabbed my daughter by the hair and wouldn't let go, and that I was protecting my child. The paramedic nodded, understanding in his eyes. He said he understood and proceeded to take care of the woman's shoulder. As he worked on the woman's shoulder, I hugged my daughter tighter and whispered reassurances to her. The adrenaline was starting to wear off and I was shaking a little, but I also felt stronger than I had in months. We gave our statements to the police when they arrived. With multiple witnesses backing up our side of the story, they decided not to press charges against me. The woman, however, was cited for assault on a minor. We walked home hand in hand. It had been a crazy day, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe we were going to be okay. Let me tell you about the worst job I've ever had. I've been working at this tech company for about 3 years, and it started off great. I was hired as a software developer right out of college, eager to prove myself and climb the corporate ladder. The first year was awesome. Challenging projects, supportive team, decent work-life balance. But things took a turn when we got a new CEO and management team. These new bigwigs came in with their streamlined processes and efficiency initiatives, which basically meant squeezing every last drop of productivity out of us while slashing benefits. They made it nearly impossible to use our paid time off, PTO. Every time I tried to request time off, I got pushback. Once I asked to take a Friday off for my cousin's wedding. My boss responded by asking if I could reschedule the wedding due to a big deadline that week. I had to explain that it wasn't my wedding, so I couldn't reschedule it. My boss then suggested I skip the ceremony and work remotely from the reception. It was ridiculous. I started losing PTO because it would expire before I could use it. But the final straw came when I got violently ill with some nasty stomach bug. I woke up at 5 a.m., barely made it to the bathroom before projectile vomiting everywhere. I spent the next hour alternating between puking my guts out and dealing with what felt like molten lava shooting out of my backside. It was brutal. As soon as I could stand without keeling over, I called my boss. I explained that I was really sick and wouldn't be able to make it in that day, mentioning it was likely stomach flu or food poisoning. My boss reminded me about a big client meeting that afternoon. I acknowledged the meeting but emphasized that I could barely stand, let alone drive to work, and that I was definitely contagious. My boss suggested I take some medicine and power through. Shocked, I pointed out that I was literally puking as we spoke. Finally, my boss relented, but refused to approve any PTO for this absence, citing company policy and claiming I should have given more notice. I tried to argue that suddenly falling ill doesn't work that way, but my boss insisted I'd have to take the day unpaid. I was furious. I'd been saving up PTO for months, planning to finally take a vacation, and now they wouldn't even let me use it when I was legitimately sick. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I didn't bother arguing further. I just hung up, turned off my phone, and spent the next 2 days recovering. When I felt human again, I checked my work email to find a bunch of angry messages from my boss and HR about my unauthorized absence. That's when I remembered our company's severance policy. If you were laid off, you got a pretty decent payout based on your years of service. And technically, not showing up for work for 3 days straight was grounds for termination. So I decided to call their bluff. I sent a quick email stating that due to my ongoing illness, I wouldn't be returning to work for the remainder of the week, and asked them to process this as paid time off or sick leave as appropriate. I knew they wouldn't approve the PTO, but I also knew they'd have to either fire me, triggering the severance payout, or back down and give me the time off I was owed. Sure enough, the next morning I got an email from HR. They said they'd reviewed my situation and unauthorized absences. Given my history with the company, they were offering me the option to resign voluntarily. If I chose this option, they would process my remaining PTO balance and pay it out with my final check. They knew they'd screwed up, and now they were trying to weasel out of the severance by getting me to quit. But hey, at this point, I just wanted out. And getting paid for all that PTO they'd never let me use? That was a nice bonus. So I took the deal. I sent back a short resignation letter, effective immediately. Within a week, I had a fat final paycheck that included all my unused PTO. Last I heard, they're hemorrhaging employees left and right. Turns out, treating people like disposable cogs isn't a great long-term strategy. I took a nice long vacation with my PTO payout, then landed a job at a company that actually respects work-life balance. When I enrolled in an urban design course at my university, I was excited about the class because it combined everything I'd learned so far: architectural design, environmental sustainability, urban infrastructure, and historic preservation. It was going to be challenging, but I was ready for it. On the first day of class, the professor announced we'd be working in groups of 3 for our semester-long project. I wasn't thrilled about group work, but I figured it wouldn't be too bad. As we were forming groups, one of my potential group members decided they wanted to join their friend's group instead. The professor, for some reason, thought it was okay to leave us as a pair. I wasn't too worried, though. I've always been confident in my abilities, and I thought having one less person might actually make things easier. When we started brainstorming ideas for our project, I suggested focusing on residential buildings. I thought it would be a relevant and interesting topic given the huge demand for housing in New York City. However, my partner disagreed. He insisted on doing industrial buildings instead. When I asked him what kind of industrial buildings he had in mind, he vaguely replied that he didn't know, just industrial stuff. I got the feeling he just wanted me to take the lead, so I started working on ideas for industrial buildings. As the weeks went by, I kept my partner updated on my progress through WhatsApp. I rarely got any feedback or updates from him, which was starting to annoy me. But I was still confident in my work, so I pushed through. Then, disaster struck. I developed a terrible kidney stone. Ironically, it wasn't from junk food or a poor diet. It was from eating too many black beans and chickpeas. I had been following a healthy meal plan I created with the help of an AI, and while it made me feel great overall, it led to the worst kidney stone of my life. I ended up in the emergency room, high on pain meds for several nights. The stone was so big it got stuck, and I needed surgery to put in a stent. Let me tell you, that's not a pleasant experience. I had to wait several more weeks, dealing with daily pain and blood in my urine, before having another surgery to remove the stent. Despite all this, I managed to keep working on our project. When I finally recovered enough to check in with my partner, I was shocked to discover he had done absolutely nothing. He had just been waiting for me to continue the work. As if that wasn't bad enough, I found out he had tried to present my work as his own during a progress check. When I asked him about the project's progress and if he had made any headway on his part, he casually informed me that he had been waiting for me to finish. He added that he had presented what I had done so far to the professor. Shocked, I pointed out that it was my work and questioned why he hadn't done anything himself. His response was infuriatingly nonchalant, saying he thought I was handling it all and asking if that wasn't fine. I decided to email the professor about the situation, explaining that I had done all the work so far. I sent screenshots of our chat history and my project file with all the revision logs. The professor reminded me that for the final submission, we'd need to put our initials on the slides we worked on. When it came time for our presentation, I decided to leave out the initials to see what my partner would do. I even tried to give him some slack by providing him with talking points for parts I was willing to let him claim as his own. But during the presentation, he kept cutting me off to talk about my project as if he had anything to do with it. He mostly just repeated what I had said, not adding any value. The judges, who were professionals in the industry, seemed to understand that I had done most of the work. They directed most of their questions to me, and I was able to answer with detailed knowledge about every aspect of the project. On the last day, to submit our work, I included my initials on every single page of the final slides. My partner, apparently missing that instruction, submitted an older version of my work. A few weeks later, I reached out to see what grade he got. When I asked him about his grade for the project, he told me he had received a C+. Upon hearing that I had gotten an A, he declared his intention to speak with the professor about why he had received such a low grade. This guy had done absolutely nothing, tried to take credit for my work, and now he was complaining about getting a passing grade he didn't even deserve. Well, at least I got to experience morphine for the first time during my ER visit. Silver linings, I guess. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.